So they had 100 people on the team to come up with a plan to just get rid of Julian Assange and get rid of WikiLeaks and get rid of this sort of threat to their ceaseless power and so what, like, how do you destroy somebody's character? Well, it's either going to be it's going to be some sort of sordid accusation. That's how you bring down somebody. So so accusing him of rape was kind of the worst possible thing that they could think of. I guess I suppose there's one more worse thing, but they couldn't find any way to sort of concoct that. So.
Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast.
So today we're really delighted to be joined by award-winning film director Kym Staton, who's based in Australia. Kym has devoted 9 years to the documentary industry. He's the founder and director of Films for Change, an educational enterprise that's been operating since 2014. And initially, Films for Change was a hybrid distributor, bringing live in-person cinema screenings of documentary films to 90 cities across the world, including Australia, New Zealand, the UK and America. During the pandemic, Films for Change evolved into streaming with their platform filmsforchange.stream, launching in May 2020. In 2021, Kym has finally put himself behind a camera and a pen, and he lends his highly trained eye for subject interpretation and narrative to direct his first documentary. An ambitious project, The Trust Fall, includes 8 animations and 23 interviews, with Kym directing, co-producing and writing the powerful narration for the film. This powerful film quickly won various awards and continues to be shown in festivals all around the world as it gears up for cinema release. And I've watched quite a few films about Julian Assange and WikiLeaks over the last week or so. And whilst most made me feel predominantly very angry, I think, Kym, the thing that was very striking about your film was it also made me feel deeply sad to the point that it moved me to tears. And so really delighted to have the chance to meet with you today to talk about it. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, and sorry for the teary experience.
No, that's good. It speaks to how emotionally powerful the film is, I think.
Hi, Kym. Good to meet with you. Can you begin perhaps to tell us how you came to start Films for Change and what your driving motivation was behind that?
Sure. From the age of 18, I've just been greatly influenced by documentaries. The first film that really opened my eyes is a very famous documentary called Baraka, which was a montage of images and music, sort of a juxtaposition of beautiful nature shots, and then suddenly changing to scenes from industrial sort of modern life, people on a crowded street, or baby chickens going down a conveyor belt into a grinder, and it just really struck me, that film, and ever since then I've always regularly watched documentaries. And then in 2014 I was doing various holding different kinds of events, and I just thought of documentaries as a way to bring people together with similar interests, and then to talk about the issues in the film that we'd seen, and that's how Films for Change started. And within 4 or 5 years, we greatly expanded into cinema and showed many films, and sometimes hundreds of screenings of really powerful films. And I've seen firsthand the impact of documentaries, how they can really completely change somebody's worldview and their choices and their lifestyle, especially with films that we've shown about plastic in the ocean, how it impacts marine and bird life, films about animal treatment, and films about human rights.
Thank you. So, as we've mentioned already, your latest film is about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. Can you give us a brief description of who Julian Assange is and what the purpose of WikiLeaks is and was? I'm conscious that he's been detained for such a long time now that some listeners may not even understand his significance.
Yeah, well, look at it. A lot of people will say I think most people nowadays have heard of him. They may not make the connection between Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. They might have heard of one or the other. And a lot of people will say, probably the majority of people say, I don't know much about it. I don't understand it. What is this about? But really everybody should know. They should know, because he is fighting for all of us. He's fighting for our ability to have a sense of what governments are doing, the crimes they're committing, and the state of things. So in a nutshell, Julian Assange is an Australian publisher and journalist. He's an encryption expert, and in 2006 he developed this innovation. It was an invention, in fact, to solve this problem of how can a whistleblower be protected. When we look back at the late 60s, early 70s, we had the Vietnam War and this legendary whistleblower, Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers. And he was just quickly prosecuted. And it's always been an issue that whistleblowers usually get in trouble, even though they're just telling the truth. They're just exposing other people's crimes. That's what a whistleblower is somebody that blows the whistle on the crimes of someone else. And so Julian's innovation was an incredible idea, which was, let's protect the whistleblower, make them allow them to be anonymous, and at the same time, the other part of it was the actual website, the WikiLeaks website, which was an electronic compendium of all of these leaks that anyone could view from anywhere in the world. But what sets it apart from other websites is that he developed a way for the servers to be multiplied, and for people to have multiple copies all over the world, so that inevitably the site is shut down. It's hacked by whoever WikiLeaks has made angry, and they will attack the website and bring it down, but it will pop up usually 24 hours or less later on another server. So it is a library that can't be burnt or demolished or destroyed.
Thank you. And why did you think another film was needed about Julian? Because there have been a number of films already. Did you think the profile needed raising again?
That's a great question. Well, look, I've seen most of the documentaries that have been made, and there's more than a dozen, and some of them are excellent and really well done. But what I noticed about them was they were all about the what and the when. So this compelling story, very complicated, very technical story, a legal story, all the many court cases and so on. But just going through a chronological series of events, which is typical that's pretty normal for documentaries, and following the story. And our idea, my partner and co-producer Natalia and I, had the idea that we could make a film that was not about the what and the when, but about the why, because there's a really big why in all of this. Why has Julian been persecuted, treated so harshly? Why is he still being detained? What did he expose, and what can we learn from that? And why haven't we solved this problem? And all the people that perpetrated these crimes that WikiLeaks exposed, why are they not being prosecuted? And why are we in this state? And why is the press freedom eroding currently in the world? Why are things getting worse in that regard? So there's so many whys about it, and the big issues that affect all of us. I also felt that all these documentaries hadn't really gone into that because they're too busy just covering the story from go to woe.
Thank you. I was watching a film just the other day called, I think it was called Shock and Awe, which was about the second Gulf War, and really what it was highlighting was just how complicit most of the press are with the high levels of deceit and corruption that surrounded that particular episode. So your film does provide an overview of the facts for context, but you focus very much on Julian's personality, both in how he's depicted and how others see him. Why did you decide to take that angle?
Well, I wouldn't say that we focus on the personality, but more about how he's been treated and the real story, because there's all of this smear. Yeah, sure, with the smear side of things, the defamation and the lies about his character and about his actions. We dismantle those, but we do that pretty quickly in the second chapter, and then the third chapter is a quick recap just to bring people up to speed, because we know that some people don't know the story, so we cover that in another 5 minutes. The rest of the film is really about the extent of the treatment that he's endured, what was the motivation, the vision, and the goal of WikiLeaks. Where did that come from, that idea? Because it didn't just arrive, and what was some of the what's the sort of ethos that Julian had? What kind of principles are behind it? And then going into all the detail about his terrible mistreatment and some suggestions of what we can do about it. We also touch on his family members, how it's affected his wife, his kids, his father, his brother, and so on. And we also go into the state of press freedom, the decline of press freedom in modern times, and highlight how that's actually getting worse, not better.
Thank you. Kim, you've got some fantastic participants in your film. You've mentioned already Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers man, but you also talk with Tariq Ali, who's been fighting for human rights for as long as I can remember. Nils Meltzer was a special rapporteur on torture for the UN, and John Pilger, who's of course got a fantastic reputation for the kind of documentary that we're talking about. How did you choose these people to interview, and how easy was it for you to persuade them to come on?
Well, this campaign being as enormous as it is, there's just an excess of talent and brains and visionary speakers and thinkers that are involved. So we're really kind of spoilt for choice. It wasn't long before I started to sort of discover who were the main voices, and of course I considered how well spoken are they, how well do they come across on screen, even how clearly you can hear them, how clearly they speak. So various elements like that. We made a list of sort of our wish list of people we'd like to approach, and I thankfully I had a contact of another documentary who had the film's called No Extradition, just a simple but very nicely done documentary about the extradition case, and it kind of featured mostly John Shipton, Julian's father. And so I was able to get in touch with John Shipton through that contact, and John said he'd be quite happy to be interviewed. And after I'd interviewed John, I started to reach out to other people. Look, some of them were very hard to reach. They don't necessarily just have their own website and there's their contact form or anything. It's often it was often a case of networking. I had to sort of be a bit of a detective and figure out, well, who knows who and who's friends, which of these people might have collaborated before and been at the same events and things like that. But yeah, as we went, it got easier, and I think after a while, some of the people that were a bit reluctant to be interviewed or didn't reply, when I sort of listed the people that had participated, then that helped them realize that we were doing something worthy, something powerful and interesting, and worth their time to be part of.
You've also included quite a bit of animation in your film, Kym. Can you explain to film novices such as me and David why you used this artistic device?
Sure. Well, one of our other main aims with the film, apart from that big break of convention with not covering a chronological sort of narrative, another big aim was that we attract a really big audience, because the film really it's not going to be effective as an impact film to add weight to the campaign for Julian's freedom unless a lot of people see it. And something I've noticed about political films is they have a very small audience, but they often do well. Like look at Citizen Four or Navalny; these are Academy Award-winning films. But how many people watch them? Does the average Joe see the poster and see the advertisement and think, oh, I could enjoy that or find it interesting or even understand it? Not really. So we've looked for various ways to appeal to the majority, to a larger audience, a wider audience, audience of people that wouldn't normally see a political film. And one of the ways was animation. So that I think animations instantly sort of tell people, well, this is not going to be just a cold, dry, serious political film with talking heads. But probably more important than that was animation allows you to go somewhere that you weren't able to go. We couldn't film Julian at Belmarsh Prison. We couldn't film inside the courthouse. UK courts don't allow cameras, unlike America. So our only option to cover, for example, the actual setting of Julian being in a glass dock at the beginning of the extradition trial, held it in a glass sort of room, as if he was a terrorist, as if he was going to endanger the court, a bulletproof glass. Well, the best way to do that was to draw it, to animate it. So that was the first animation we did, showing that predicament, that treatment, which was just appalling. I was shocked, really shocked, when I first heard that it makes that court hearing really unfair and unbalanced. That both parties don't sort of have an equal ability to actually communicate with each other. As we went, we came up with other things to animate. One of the main ones was we wanted to do a brief sort of overview of the history of free speech. So we had two animators collaborate to sort of draw all of these beautiful scenes from history to highlight this progression of humanity through thousands of years, 5,000 years, going all the way back to the Magna Carta and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we sort of whiz through history in 3 minutes, sort of a fly-through helicopter effect through all these incredible scenes, just to remind people of the context in time. Here we are in 2023, and with press freedom declining, and these rights that we've fought for that over thousands of years, they weren't given to us. Free speech wasn't handed on a plate. As soon as civilizations such as ancient Egypt and ancient Greece and so on, as soon as these large civilizations developed, around religion, then you had a hierarchy, and you had people on top governing our speech, controlling what we say and getting us in trouble and making threats if we say the wrong thing. And we've gradually, over these thousands of years, literally fought for our rights, and people have been persecuted, individuals, from Galileo to Emmeline Pankhurst with the suffragettes, and just so many figures that, I mean, we cover them in that animation, and what you see is this sort of history repeats. It's when I researched that, when I was studying that, I just noticed so many similarities in the way that underground publishers a couple of hundred years ago, for example, were there's an example in the animation of a chap who was an underground printer, and in London, and he was putting out pamphlets against the kings, sort of calling for the return of the ousted kings. And when they tracked him down, they basically just took him to the town square, hung him up, and cut him in half and dragged him down the street. And then the English government basically got rid of the printing laws because they realized, oh, you know what, we can actually control the press just by scaring them. And here we are 200 years later, and they're doing the exact same thing with Julian Assange. The only difference being that the method has changed. Instead of a public square, now we have the internet, now we have social media to spread these ideas. So you don't need to pull someone into the public square. And in 2023, in the Western world, we don't take a publisher, hang them up and cut them in half, hung, drawn and quartered. So the way that they're doing away with Julian is actually a slow, prolonged murder, where they're just hoping that if they keep him in solitary confinement and for years and years and years, that he might pass away, he might be murdered. They're doing it quietly in the dark, behind closed doors. It's that kind of murder attempt that they're trying to do with Julian. And I mean, no surprise that he had a mini stroke last year, and continues to sort of have worse health problems.
Yeah, that kind of character assassination that you speak of in relation to Julian is just so common, isn't it, for people who speak up? They find that they often people with integrity who then find themselves on the receiving end of malicious allegations. And I remember when the allegations of rape were made.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just remember the name of that fellow in our animation. It's William Anderton, the underground printer, 200 years ago in London, that was hung, drawn and quartered. And funnily enough, the other ironic thing is that the courthouse where they tried him is the same courthouse where they took Julian Assange, and they used the same methods. They had witnesses that lied, which is also happening in Julian's case with the star witness Siggy Thordarson. So its history repeats.
Yeah, I think the allegations of rape, I think, really were hugely significant in terms of, knocking Julian down and discrediting him to such a degree that you were left questioning his integrity as a person. And I think you do attend to that process in terms of how it was a process. But I wonder, what one of the things that really comes through in the film is a palpable sense of hatred of Julian by, some of these figures, the states and what have you. And I wondered, how does somebody cope with that level of hatred when they're treated in this kind of way?
We can only imagine the turmoil, the experience of Julian when all of that sort of kicked off around 2010. as soon as he released, all of those big releases happened in 2010 were the major ones, the Iraq war logs, Afghan war logs, and then Vault 7, which exposed that the CIA were spying on its own citizens, breaking the Constitution by doing that. Look, the whole plan to destroy Julian Assange, from what I've been told, is that there was a team, a task force assigned to this plan to destroy, and we have some evidence of that in the film, the Stratfor emails. So they had 100 people on the team to come up with a plan to just get rid of Julian Assange and get rid of WikiLeaks and get rid of this sort of threat to their ceaseless power and so what, like, how do you destroy somebody's character? Well, it's either going to be it's going to be some sort of sordid accusation. That's how you bring down somebody. So accusing him of rape was kind of the worst possible thing that they could think of. I guess I suppose there's one more worse thing, but they couldn't find any way to sort of concoct that. So they took advantage, and all of this, by the way, is we detail it briefly in the film, but more detail if you read Niels Melzer's excellent book, The Trial of Julian Assange. He actually went through all of these documents from the Swedish allegations, from the Swedish police reports, found more than 40 examples of violation of due process, including active manipulation of evidence. So it's very well detailed in that book. I can only give you a short summary, but they're basically just taken advantage of the fact that two women had some liaisons with him, and they went to the police because Julian, which to his fault, he wouldn't agree to have an HIV test for whatever reason, and they just went there to get help, and one of them was only accompanying the other one, and it was all just blown up out of that. It was leaked straight from within 24 hours. It was from the police room, which is meant to be a private, a confidential space, to the press and onto all the front pages of the news around the world. And you imagine how devastating that would be to someone that has worked so hard to bring us information, useful information that can end wars, that can end corruption and end the ceaseless murder of genocides of different countries and different people. Someone that's worked so hard to make a difference in the world, a positive difference, to have their character just demolished. And also it almost destroyed this wonderful organization that serves society, it does an incredible service to humanity, being WikiLeaks with showing us what's really going on.
Thank you. And listeners might be interested to read about Garrick and Buck's Whistleblowers Retaliation Checklist, which identifies all kinds of strategies that are used to retaliate against whistleblowers. And Jackie Garrick was herself a US military whistleblower. But one of the strategies they identify is the deployment of physical and emotional violence, and 14% of their sample had experienced physical or sexual violence, and 75% lived in fear of this happening. Now, your film shows how relevant this is to Julian, doesn't it?
Yes. So in Julian's case, he's been detained arbitrarily, which means, in an unfair, sort of unwarranted or illogical way. So arbitrarily detained for 12 and a half years from the initial house arrest, and then he was forced to seek asylum in the Ecuadorian Embassy of London, where he was there for almost 7 years. And then now he's been at Belmarsh prison for more than 4 years, 4.5 years. And so, that takes an incredible toll, the lack of sunlight, the difficulty in exercising, not to mention the stress, all the fear related to, being pursued by the biggest empire that has ever existed on the earth. So what we document in the film is the psychological torture that he's endured, and this is not speculation. In 2019, May 2019, the Special Rapporteur on Torture at the time from the United Nations, Niels Melzer, went to visit Julian in Belmarsh prison with two doctors, Pau Perez Sales and Duarte Nono, who's another doctor. So they went to the prison and assessed him under the Istanbul Protocol on torture. And they did an assessment, a very thorough assessment for a few hours. And the determination of Niels Melzer, who is an expert on torture, that's his role at the UN at the time, his assessment was that Julian is a victim of psychological torture. And in his words, psychological torture is by no means torture light. So it's not any less devastating or impactful than physical torture. So that's what Julian has been subjected to, and that's what they've done to him. It's beyond appalling and disgusting. It's into some other realm that they could do that to a person. You got to look at this situation, like being in a tiny cell, maximum security prison, the harshest prison in UK, amongst people that are there for terrible crimes, murders and so on. And it's isolation. It's 22 hours a day of solitary confinement. But I think the worst thing about it is not knowing how long you're there for. Because even a murderer knows their sentence. So if someone is in there for 10 years, 15, 20 years, whatever, all for life, they know the situation. But Julian still doesn't know what's going on, how long he's going to be there for.
And do you know, Kim, so he's housed in segregation. Do you know if that's something that he's wanted himself, or is that how the prison system has treated him?
No. Since he was arrested, well, then he doesn't really get any decisions, not even over his bodily integrity. So he was vaccinated without any choice in the matter. He's given medications. He's drugged up, and I don't think he has choice over that. When he appeared in court, he actually couldn't appear in court because he was heavily medicated. And he's been treated as if he is one of the worst criminals of the UK, and that's why he's in a maximum security prison in isolation, so that he can't interact with people. It is just another form of torture. It's a tiny cell, 22 hours a day of isolation, 1 hour for exercise, and the rest of the time he might get to have a meeting with or a phone chat with his wife or with his family or lawyers. So very limited visitation rights, and just very little freedom, and that's all intentional. That's all designed to scare journalists all around the world, to basically terrorize the press and the future would-be whistleblowers, and make everyone scared that, if you publish the crimes of the powerful, we're basically going to crush you.
Yeah, we've both worked for many years in prisons, and obviously, ordinarily, there's a desire to get people out of segregation, and there are some people who do choose to retreat there. But it seems again it's a misuse and abuse of process and the system, and in the same way that your film shows, as you said, he had to kneel down to talk through glass to his lawyers who were alongside the prosecution, so not able to have a private conversation. So there's lots of examples in your film of how he's denied any right to fairness in terms of how he's been treated.
And another just awful example. It's not nice to hear all of this, but it's important. Before they made the announcement about that his appeal, that he'd lost his legal team had basically lost the extradition case, and then it was passed to the Home Secretary Priti Patel. She rubber stamped it basically to approve his extradition. So before all of that went ahead, was basically processed. The day before that, he was taken to basically I'm not sure what they call it, a panic room type of thing. He was stripped naked, with this justification that he might be a threat to himself. And they also did that before some of the court hearings, that they just stripped him naked. And yeah, it's all just appalling, especially for someone that's committed no crime, done a service to humanity, and is a gentle intellectual idealist, and on top of that, quite a genius. Somebody that has solved a big problem in the world, and the whole situation is just rife with abuse of process, and they continue to get away with it because not enough people are aware of it or speak up or do anything, and that's why we need to create more awareness.
Thank you.
So I was just thinking while you were talking that it goes right back, doesn't it? Because I think Julian has been defined by the United States as a terrorist. And once that has been done, then all the kind of treatments that you just described flow on from that, whatever the reality of the situation is. Anyway, I'm just thinking about the film again. You focus, obviously WikiLeaks is a huge amount of information and material, and you choose a couple of segments to focus on. And one particularly harrowing part of the film is the footage of unarmed civilians going about their business, being murdered by American military who request permission under the spurious request that they're carrying arms, which they clearly aren't. And this kind of material is enormously powerful because it conveys some sort of sense just of power, the kind of power which states can exercise over a distance. But why did you decide to use that particular bit of material in the film?
Right, okay. So WikiLeaks has released over 10 million documents from 212 countries, basically every country of the world. But the collateral murder video, as it's known, or in other circles it's called the Iraq air attack, is, it's one of the most, or maybe the most powerful video ever of a war. It's really, you can't really overstate how confronting and important this video is. So, obviously it's a documentary and it's on a screen and it's visual. So that was an obvious choice to have something visual rather than something that we explain through documents. Although we do briefly mention some of the other releases. I didn't want to only cover the collateral murder video. But for those who haven't seen that video, it's a harsh watch, and whenever we have this kind of material in a film, whether it's about the treatment of animals or plastic in the stomach of a turtle, it's a question of, well, is it important for us to see it in order to solve the problem? And in the case of collateral murder video, I firmly believe that everyone, at least over the age of 18, should watch it, and hence we put it into the film. And basically, the way that we present it in the film is longer than if you have seen the footage. Typically, people have, the small, maybe 1% of the world that has seen that video, Usually they've just seen 5 or 10 seconds of it quickly on the news. That's how I saw it. I remember seeing it in 2010 on the news one night. Didn't know what it was about, didn't know that it was to do with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. So if people can connect that footage with Julian and with this whole indictment, because the indictment is largely based on the Iraq war logs, the material that Chelsea Manning provided to WikiLeaks. People need to connect those dots and realize that this is the reason, the main reason perhaps, that they're going after him is because of that footage. It's so embarrassing for the US government, for the US Army. It's a war crime. The people that perpetrate it still haven't been taken to justice. And so we put it into the film. We were also provided some footage of, which is very valuable as a supplement to that actual video, is the interviews with some of the victims. The daughter, the son of the man that was killed in the attack on his van. To summarize it, and without giving it away too much, because people should come and see the film, but essentially it's 2007 in New Baghdad. There's a group of around 20 people walking down the street. Above you have a US Apache helicopter. They suspect that 2 of the men are carrying weapons, and they wait for the right moment, and they basically, shoot them down, a rain of bullets. And what's revealed is that they weren't actually carrying guns, they were carrying cameras. And 2 of the men that were killed were Reuters journalists. They were cameramen. So it's an attack on civilians. There was no weapons. They didn't engage. So they broke the rules of engagement, and they essentially just murdered 20 civilians. And then they covered it up. They didn't. They lied. The US lied about what actually happened, even though there was investigations from Reuters and other media. And then 3 years later, Chelsea Manning, who was working in the US Army, saw the footage, and she decided that regardless of the consequences, she would put that out to the public, because we need to see it. We need to see what's going on. What are the governments doing with our money and without our knowledge? And she took that risk. She shared it with WikiLeaks, and then we have had the ability to have that insight, and it's changed the world, whether you know it or not. Even if you haven't seen the footage, it's changed the world. So the more people that see it, the more change there can be. And it's just disgusting that 13 years, 16 years later, there's still no justice for those victims, for those 20 people, for those kids that were in the van. Nothing was done. I mean, they didn't even help them. No financial assistance, just nothing.
Yeah, that's truly shocking. And why haven't journalists done more to uncover this and indeed to assist Julian? I mean, you'd think the way in which they all got their fingers burned over the Iraq wars, that they'd kind of be going all out for it. But it's almost as if they're complicit in the ongoing mistreatment. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we've seen over these 12 and a half years that Julian's been persecuted and tortured, is and arbitrarily detained, is that basically a mainstream media blackout until something escalates, until something worse is done to him, and then they cover it. So they're really just playing along to the tune of this plan to basically scapegoat Julian Assange, to ward off other journalists from exposing their dirty laundry. So they're just these mainstream outlets have done an incredible disservice to their own profession. And I think it's quite ironic and even humorous, if it wasn't so tragic and dire, is that now we have AI coming in and replacing those kinds of journalists, making their jobs obsolete. Those types of journalists that when they're not putting out lies, they're just regurgitating government handouts. And now you have smarter computers that are smarter than them, who can just take their jobs. But what the world needs is real journalism. We need to know the truth. And this is another side to WikiLeaks, is that it's 100% accurate stuff. They've never had to retract anything that they've put out, because they did the research, they did the due diligence, and did whatever they had to do to ensure that they're putting out accurate documents. Unlike your average newspaper that basically every week they're redacting something, retracting something that they've published. And so Julian Assange with WikiLeaks took journalism to another level. It's really a neo-journalism. And so then you have this smear that some other journalists like to put out, which is that he's not a real journalist. No, he's not. He's not the same journalist that your average journalist. He's a very, very successful journalist that has reinvented journalism. Why do they do that? Yeah, because I guess they feel like they're supposed to conform to the sort of the status quo of ripping into Julian Assange, throwing him under the bus, to the detriment of their own profession. They should be standing up. However, in the last year, we have seen those major newspapers that at the time they were the ones that profited and benefited from publishing this material. The New York Times, Der Spiegel, Le Monde, a couple of other newspapers finally came out and sort of banded together and said this persecution of Julian Assange is a threat to our industry. It's wrong and we're against it. But I guess it's a case of better late than never.
Just conscious of the time, and so just before we finish, I wondered how listeners can watch your film.
Yes, so where we're at is that the film is showing in festivals around the world over the next 2 or 3 months. Then we will plan to get it out into cinemas in the Western countries very soon as we can. We're talking to distributors at the moment. So we want to get the film out as quick as possible. We're not going to do the usual thing of staying on the festival circuit for a long time. And they should just follow our social media on Twitter, the Trustful Julian Assange documentary on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and Telegram, and there'll be regular updates of the festival screenings in many different countries, as well as the coming cinema release.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed talking to you today, Kym. Thanks for giving us your time.
Thanks a lot, Kym. Great to meet you.
Some of the facts in that film, which aren't really that surprising, but they are quite shocking. But the US has been at war for 235 of its 247 years existence. I just think that's incredible. And been responsible for 20 million deaths. And they have 750 overseas military bases. And you just think, colossal.
It's astounding, isn't it? And,
yeah, it is. And some of the other figures that were quite shocking in the film are just trying to find where I've written them down. There were 3 million deaths in Iraq. 80% of those were civilian, 5 million orphans, and 9 million refugees as a consequence.